Hello and welcome back to the Diddy on Trial podcast from BBC Sounds with me, Anoushka Mutanda-Dougherty. Each week you can find us on BBC Sounds or here on the BBC World Service, giving you updates on what's shaping up to be the trial of the decade. Diddy's been charged with sex trafficking, transportation for prostitution and racketeering with conspiracy. He denies it all. Now, I hope everybody managed to get some rest over the holidays, even Diddy's defence team, although I don't think there would have been much rest in Mark Agnifalo's household. He's one of Diddy's defence lawyers, because while he's prepping for the dawn of the Diddy trial, his wife, Karen Agnifalo, is heading up the defence for the suspect who went viral for a smile, Luigi Mangione, and he's also being detained at the Brooklyn Metropolitan Detention Center in New York. And it's in that jail that the Daily Mail claimed that Diddy had a breakdown over the holidays and was begging guards to take him to hospital. Now, we asked his team about this. They denied these claims, stating that he continues to stay strong and focused on his defence, but they specifically told us he missed his family on Christmas Day, a holiday he traditionally spends with his children. Look, the idea of Diddy in jail has sparked a lot of interest, going from a life of glamour into a jail that a US judge has called dangerous and barbaric. And it's that jail we're going to be focusing on today. Abby on Instagram has asked, is it actually as bad as people say it is? I feel like people are hyping it up because P. Diddy is in there. Well, it's also been home to Ghislaine Maxwell and R. Kelly and the fallen king of crypto, Sam Bankman-Fried. So today we're taking you behind the bars of the MDC, asking how Diddy's life's changed inside it and whether it's really as bad as people say. My first guest is Catana Yehudah. Catana, you've served time inside the MDC, so has your brother. You served for fraud, he served for gun possession. You've also protested against the conditions in the jail. But for people who have no concept of what going to jail is like, what is it like when you first go in there?
The first couple of days are heartbreaking because you're taken completely away from family. There's no interaction with anyone except prisoners or the guards. So you have no idea what to expect as far as going through things with the prisoner or the guards, because it can go either way when you first walk through those prison gates. So it's really, even for the toughest person in the world, it's scary because you just don't know what to expect.
And do you have all of your belongings taken away?
Everything. And I went in with extension braids in my hair. They made me sit in the cell and take every braid out of my hair before I was let into population.
I mean, for somebody like who's a billionaire beforehand, somebody like Diddy, it must be completely shocking.
It's actually, I don't think that MDC is for any human being at all. I mean, I'm not saying that no one belongs, you commit a crime, you have to wait to, your trial and everything else. But I don't think that jail is fit for anyone unless they clean up the conditions.
Lots of prisoners complain about lots of different jails and they say that the conditions are not up to scratch. What, in your opinion, makes the MDC stand out? What makes it worse?
What makes it worse is the food. Mostly everything is stale food, is old food that's donated by other people that they wrap up or they cook for you. Mostly everything they have is full of not roaches and the giant cockroaches. You can smell the mold, you can smell the rot, you can smell the jail that it needs to be rebuilt. It needs help. I don't think anyone should be in that particular jail.
There are lots of different people inside that jail. We know that there's a wing that houses high-profile prisoners, R. Kelly, Ghislaine Maxwell, now P. Diddy's in there. Are you aware of the high-profile prisoners? Do you have any interaction with them?
I don't have any, and we never had interaction with high-profile prisoners at all.
And one of the main reasons that a lot of people know about the Metropolitan Detention Center was because it made headlines in 2019. And one of the issues they had was keeping their prison population warm. And it gets extremely cold in Brooklyn.
Well, in 2019, something went wrong. They had a power outage. They didn't have any water. They didn't have any lights. They didn't have any heat. And the mayor the city council tried to bring over blankets, and the warden wouldn't accept it. They were banging. My brother called me from a cell phone that was not supposed to be there. And he cried. He said, listen, I think I'm going to die in here. So I panicked. I said, what the hell you mean? You're having problems with a prisoner? Do I have to, call a lawyer or what can I do? He said, no, I'm going to freeze to death. I said, freeze? He said, yeah, we don't have no water. So I called the news station and made a whole big show. And I went down there and I, had to do something about it, not just for my brother, but for anybody. He was telling me that he thought his roommate was going to die because his feet was turning purple. They didn't give my brother his medication. No gas, no lights, no water, no heat for almost 2 weeks.
Just take me back to the moment, because I've seen the videos of you outside protesting. It is extremely impactful. You can hear prisoners shouting down from their cells saying, "We are freezing."
I screamed to the inmates. I said, "Everybody, please be quiet." And they stopped banging. I said, "If you are freezing cold, bang on the windows." It was so loud you could hear it from blocks away. It was so loud, and it was, it was heartbreaking, for me to know that, my brother and other people were going through this.
Yeah, and look, I've spoken to your brother, Jason, about this incident. He shared with me some diary entries that he kept from that time. At one point, he wrote, "I have socks on my toilet seat so that when I sit down, it will be warm." I mean, these are the sort of lengths that prisoners were going through.
It was horrible because, my brother's a man's man. So to hear him on the phone trembling like, "I don't think I'm gonna make it here. Let me tell you what's going on." That was scary for me. I couldn't imagine, and at that time, it's funny because at that time the news was, people were going up, picking up stray dogs, taking them off the streets and taking the bums off the trains and off the streets so they wouldn't freeze to death. But yet and still, you would allow these prisoners in that jail to freeze.
And look, we did ask the Federal Bureau of Prisons for a statement on what happened in 2019. They didn't directly address it, but they said they have an administrative remedy program for incarcerated individuals to seek formal review and redress of almost any concern they have regarding their incarceration. The Bureau of Prisons say the MDC should be safe, humane, and provide work and other self-improvement opportunities to assist offenders in becoming law-abiding citizens. Does the MDC, in your opinion, live up to what they say their prison should do?
Like I said, because you're in prison and you're serving time or you're waiting, to go to court or to go to trial or whatever it is, does not mean that you're not a human being. Just like what's going on with Diddy, he still deserves to be treated as a human being. He still deserves a fair trial. Innocent before proven guilty. Whatever happened to that?
So how do you keep yourself entertained throughout the day? What do you do?
Well, I read books. I read books and I daydreamed a lot. Like literally just to keep my head on straight. I prayed a lot.
So we were just hearing from Catana Yehudah about what it's like to stay inside the Metropolitan Detention Center. Andrew Dalack is a New York-based federal public defender, and he's represented lots of clients who've served time there. Andrew, is it really as bad as people say?
Well, first, Anoushka, I want to thank you and the BBC for taking an interest in the conditions at MDC Brooklyn, because it is an important issue of significant public interest. Anybody who has a loved one detained in that facility, that they deeply care about their well-being and their safety there, and they have good reason to. It is as bad of a place as people say it is, but the crux of the issue really is a conflation of, I think, three factors that sort of work together to create a perfect storm. The first is chronic understaffing, so that the jail is routinely operating at anywhere from 2/3 to 75% sort of capacity at best at any given point. The second is overcrowdedness. There's just too many people there, to begin with. And then the third is a certain bureaucratic intransigence. So there just does not appear to be a meaningful political will to do anything about the situation in MDC Brooklyn, and that's why we're trying to seize upon opportunities like this when it seems like the public takes a particular interest in the conditions there, because there are certain high-profile individuals detained there, and we're happy that's the case, but it shouldn't be that people should care about the conditions of a particular facility because the people who were housed there are popular or have sort of public stature. Everybody's life is matters equally in this regard, and so it's really important that the public knows what's happening there.
You've seen other jails. What makes this one stand out?
At MDC Brooklyn, which is divided into two separate buildings. There's a west building and there's an east building. What happens, especially in the West building, is that if there's a problem in a particular unit, let's say there's a fight, let's say there's an argument or some sort of a dispute between a staff member and a detainee, the facility's knee-jerk reaction is to lock the whole unit down, and sometimes to lock the whole facility down. So and that's in large part because it's understaffed. If something goes wrong or if something happens, they need to marshal a number of staff members to a particular floor. Well, that means that they necessarily have to lock everything else down. And what do we mean by a lockdown? These lockdowns are akin to solitary confinement. People are relegated to their cells for 23, 24 hours a day for an interminable period of time. They're denied access to showers. They're denied access to hot food. They're denied access to the telephone to speak with their loved ones. It's much more difficult for them to meet with their attorneys in any sort of expeditious fashion. It puts a tremendous amount of strain on people, and that's just notwithstanding the sort of psychological impact of being confined to a very tiny cell with another person for days at a time. In addition to the psychological impact of being locked in on a regular basis, our clients routinely complain about inadequate amounts of food that oftentimes is inedible. People routinely complain of inadequate access to recreation. So I have clients there who throughout their entire time at MDC Brooklyn never saw the sun, never were allowed to go outside and be able to just breathe fresh air. There's also the issue of safety. So when there's a dispute or when there's a problem between detainees, and you can obviously imagine how being locked up for interminable periods of time only enhances the stress level and enhances the tension. When that tension culminates in some sort of a fight, there's contraband rampant in that facility, and there's homemade weapons that are created out of pieces of metal and other sort of makeshift items that a lot of different detainees have available to them. And so when there's a fight or when there's some sort of other conflict, it can quickly escalate. And when it escalates, people get hurt, people get stabbed, and it's a very sort of volatile environment that is a terribly scary place to be.
And look, lots of prisoners from lots of different jails say it's terrible inside, the conditions are awful, and that's a widespread critique that could be applied to a lot of places. But you were involved with a case, you represented someone where a judge made a pretty damning statement about MDC Brooklyn. Can you talk to me a little bit about what happened with Mr. Chavez?
Yes. So Gustavo Chavez is my client. He was charged with drug offense in the federal system, sort of receiving a package in the mail containing drugs. So whether you're convicted after trial or convicted because you've pled guilty to certain kinds of drug offenses, the law says you have to go to jail before you're ultimately sentenced by the judge. In Mr. Chavez's case, he did in fact plead guilty to one of those drug offenses that ordinarily required him to be remanded to jail pending sentencing. But Mr. Chavez presented with some challenges. He's an older man. He has health issues. I made an argument to Judge Jesse Furman. It would be cruel and completely unnecessary to put someone like Mr. Chavez in particular at MDC Brooklyn, given all the problems in the facility, which are also compounded by something that I failed to mention before, which is a lack of adequate medical care and attention. Well, to Judge Furman's credit, he not only engaged with my argument, acknowledging that other judges in the district had in individual cases concluded that the decrepit conditions at MDC Brooklyn warranted keeping people out on bail. He wrote a very well-reasoned decision and went through a sort of litany of problems that has plagued the MDC for years, again, primarily driven by understaffing, to say, look, there is some real merit to what I was arguing, that the conditions at MDC Brooklyn are so terrible that no judge in the Eastern or Southern districts of New York can be confident that in putting somebody there, he decided that was an exceptional reason in and of itself to keep Mr. Chavez and anybody else who did not otherwise present a risk of flight or a danger to the community while on bail from going to MDC Brooklyn pending sentencing. So it was really a landmark and watershed decision. It's given a lot of other judges in the Eastern and Southern districts of New York considerable cover to say, look, we agree with Judge Furman's, very sound reasoning and logic. And again, where there's not a compelling argument that a person poses a flight risk or a danger to the community, it's entirely appropriate to keep them out of MDC Brooklyn.
And the judge agreed with you, sided with you. Did the prison respond to your critiques?
The jail didn't respond itself, but in our papers, we actually cited to a letter that was sent out by one of the union representatives for the correctional officers working at MDC Brooklyn, in which the union representative herself criticized the conditions and criticized the lack of staffing and the lack of resources, and implored the authorities at the facility to do something about it before more people get hurt.
And you've just spoken there about the conditions within the jail that would have negatively impacted your client, Mr. Chavez. Is that different at all to the conditions that high-profile detainees like P. Diddy, like R. Kelly, like Ghislaine Maxwell would be experiencing within that jail?
So, it's hard for me to speak to each individual's experience. I'm confident that no matter who you are or where you're being held in MDC Brooklyn, it is an extremely challenging place. And again, what makes it so challenging is that it's like essentially like a black hole. So if you have an emergency medical issue, if your blood sugar is too high and you're a diabetic, or you have some sort of a heart attack or a medical emergency, there's absolutely no guarantees that you're going to be receiving medical care. I've heard horror stories from clients where one of their cellmates has collapsed and they're banging on their cell door during a lockdown, begging for a correctional officer to come and intervene, and nobody comes for minutes. And again, I'm not saying that's because the people in the MDC Brooklyn don't care. I'm just saying there's not enough of them there. And it shouldn't be the case that while you're awaiting trial on serious federal charges, that you also have to be worried, am I going to make it out of here alive? Or am I going to make it out of here without being, stabbed or beaten? Dealing with a federal criminal case is stressful enough. And having to sort of deal with all the other atmospherics at MDC Brooklyn makes it truly unbearable. If I can just sort of say as a side note too, as a lawyer, you can imagine how terribly frustrating and difficult it is to come to the jail, to meet with our clients, to try and discuss with them, very complicated and difficult aspects of their case, and to ask them to engage with us on making, very consequential decisions about their lives, when all they want to talk about is the terrible conditions that they're forced to endure inside the jail. Conditions that I don't really have any control over, because they become so focused on the terrible conditions that they're experiencing in MDC Brooklyn that they are not in a position to really think clearly and contribute meaningfully to their defense on their federal criminal case.
And just as a final question today, what do you say to people who say that people have committed crimes? Some people feel that, you're not going to get a 5-star stay in a prison. What do you say to that?
I have two responses to that, primarily. The first is the vast majority of the people who were held at MDC Brooklyn have not been convicted of anything. They're presumed innocent. And that presumption of innocence doesn't mean anything if we're going to put them in a place and say, well, there's reason to believe that you've committed a crime, and so now you deserve to be punished extraordinarily. Okay, that's not how the American criminal system works. That's just not a way that other human beings, should be treated. Everybody's life at MDC Brooklyn matters equally. It certainly matters to the people who love and care about them, and we need to be treating those human lives with dignity. And so, it's just not. It's not a tolerable situation. And unfortunately, until there's more political will to really implement more meaningful reforms at the jail and address the chronic understaffing, the intransigence, the lack of adequate medical care, all these issues that we've been discussing today, it's going to remain a hellhole.
And look, we asked the Federal Bureau of Prisons about all the areas we've talked about today, and they sent us a statement in which they told us they don't discuss individual cases. They did say they take seriously their duty to protect all individuals entrusted in their custody, as well as maintain the safety of correctional employees and the community. Their FBOP, the Federal Bureau of Prisons, say they also review safety protocols and implement corrective actions when identified as necessary. The statement goes on to say that last year, the director appointed an urgent action team to take a holistic look at the challenges at MDC Brooklyn. The team's work is ongoing, but it has already increased the permanent staffing at the institution, as well as other changes. And the FBOP also told us that anytime a facility is on lockdown or modified operation status, all incarcerated individuals continue to have at least 3 meals per day, water, medical and psychological services. Also, they are offered the opportunity to shower on a rotational basis, and they maintain continued access to communicate with loved ones by sending and receiving mail via the US Postal Service. Andrew, thanks so much for stopping by and talking to us today. That was Andrew Dalack, federal public defender based in New York. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
Before we go, of course, it's time for Fact or Fiction. And this week, we're basing it off a question that we got sent on WhatsApp. It says, "Hi, Anoushka and team. You mentioned in the last episode that the DA, the District Attorney of New York, is changing. And of course, we're getting a new government. Could the change in staff affect the case?" And I think this is such a good question because I keep seeing on social media pictures of Trump and Diddy at various events that they've attended together, hugging with the caption saying, you know, Trump's going to pardon Diddy when he gets in. I don't know if he can. I don't know if that's possible. So, of course, it's time to call Sean, our resident criminal defense attorney, and ask him. So, hi, Sean. Thanks for joining us today. My only question to you is, can Trump pardon Diddy?
Yes. I think the easiest way to describe it, yes, he can. It is in his powers as the president of the United States. It's guaranteed by the United States Constitution. The president of the United States has powers, and it's his. It's his and alone. He don't got to ask permission. He don't got to go to his mom and them. He can go to whoever. On his own, he can sit there and say, because the federal Constitution guarantees it, he can pardon individuals who have been convicted, not just accused, convicted of crimes federally. You cannot get in early and say, I'm going to pardon you so there can be no conviction. If he wanted to, technically he could go in because this is a federal offense. As a power of the president guaranteed from the United States Constitution, he could come in and just say, I think this conviction should not stand, and could use his power to pardon him. Do I think it's going to happen? 0.0 chance.
Has anything like that ever happened before?
Well, it's happened right now. Joe Biden actually pardoned his son. So if you looked at the fact that Hunter Biden was looking at federal charges, he was looking at tax charges, gun charges, he was recently convicted, and the president of the United States, our current president, Joe Biden, came along and pardoned his son. If you look at it one step further, it is expected that once Donald Trump takes office, he's going to actually pardon all individuals who weren't engaged in violence dealing with the January 6th offenses for storming our Capitol some 4 years ago. Those are federal offenses. It's expected he's going to just, with a stroke of a pen, cut all of those folks loose. So not only has it happened before, it almost always happens with the president of the United States.
So this is something they're allowed to do. If, say, you'd been convicted of murder, could the president pardon you still?
Great question. Technically, yes, if it's a federal charge, because make sure usually our murder charges are handled by the state, our individual states, South Carolina, Mississippi, all of our individual states. The president has no power whatsoever on a state conviction, and that's usually where murders happen. That's up to the governor. Now, if there is a federal murder charge, which is very rare, if you look at it, there's currently 3 individuals, I think, in the United States, maybe 4, who are looking at death penalty cases or federal situations. If there's a conviction, could it happen? Yes. And as a matter of fact, Joe Biden, our former president, commuted the sentences of some 20 or 30 people who are looking at death penalty type charges. So, yeah, it could actually happen. You look at the Luigi Mangione case. That's a murder charge. The president, technically, if there's a conviction, could get involved in that case.
Thanks so much, Sean, and I'll see you again very soon.
Thank you so much for having me. Much appreciated.
But if you have a question that you want us to unpack on the podcast, please WhatsApp them to us at +44 330 123 551. That's +44 330 123 551. We really enjoy answering them on the podcast. That's it from us today. You've been listening to Diddy on Trial from BBC Sounds and the BBC World Service with me, Anoushka Mutanda-Dougherty. Make sure you subscribe to the World Service YouTube channel so you never miss a thing.